Good evening and welcome to the March 12th, 2025 Scarborough Town Council Ordinance Committee meeting. I will note that we have a full committee here with Councillor Fellows and Councillor Donovan. I am Councillor Shoup. And first we will begin with we have public comment first. So I will open this up to public comment. If there is anyone who wants to speak to any of the agenda items this evening, you have 3 minutes. If you would like to step up to the podium. Yeah. Yep.
Start anytime.
Yeah, do you want to give us your name and address?
Yep. Paul Beaver, 21 Owens Way. I appreciate you guys letting me present my case here. I wrote down a statement to keep things straight for me. So my journey to operate my landscaping company from this property has been incredibly frustrating and arduous. And I'd like to share a brief overview of the events that have transpired. In May of 2022, I purchased this property with the intention of housing my landscaping business. Understanding that horticulture falls under the agricultural umbrella, I believed my use of this property would be consistent with the spirit of the rural farming district. Despite my feeling this way, I took the path of least resistance and pursued an exception before the Zoning Board of Appeals. Since horticultural use is not explicitly mentioned in the zoning ordinance, I successfully obtained a non-conforming use permit, which I thought would adequately allow me to operate my business within the community and pursue my plans to improve the property. The ZBA seemed to concur that it was little more than a waste of time and issued the permit without any objection. However, in October 2022, when I sought to improve the property by replacing one of the existing buildings and erecting 1 to 2 residential units, I encountered unexpected resistance during a site review pre-planning meeting. The town staff informed me that I could not pursue a site plan review because, as they interpreted it, having a non-conforming use and a conforming use on the same property was not permissible. While I genuinely appreciate the town staff's efforts to move my project forward, the convoluted process has made things unnecessarily difficult and has slowed the progress of my plans. Additionally, I must clarify a significant misrepresentation in the proceedings. The staff has included language suggesting my request was primarily to permit employee housing. This is not the case. While it would be a nice benefit, my intention is to build regular residential units, not seasonal housing for employees. This misunderstanding has further complicated my efforts to advance my plans, as it seemed to be a sticking point for the Long Range Planning Committee's discussion, and I want to ensure that my objectives are accurately represented. What should have been a straightforward process has dragged on for 2 full years. During this time, I've faced delays, projected cash flow losses, and missed opportunity to increase my property value. My attempts to have the non-conforming use permit rescinded and seek conforming status have only intensified this frustration, as the LRPC has batted this matter around for over a year before kicking it to your committee. I stand before you with a simple request. I want to improve my existing buildings and build my own home on my own land, all consistent with the intention of the district's ordinances. I believe that investing in building 1 or 2 sustainable residential units benefits me and aligns with the community interests by fostering a vibrant and functional use of the space in our rural landscape. I urge you to consider the merits of my case seriously. Please allow me the opportunity to move forward with my plans swiftly, and let's work together for the betterment of the property and our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bieber. All right, I don't see anybody online. So I will close public comment. Item 4 is the approval of the minutes from the February 2025 meeting. Did everyone get a chance to review those? Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Great. Okay, so we will jump into agenda item number 5, which is the review and consider amendments to section 11 of off-street parking regulations to amend the electric vehicle charging systems requirements as recommended by the Sustainability Committee, including combining parking tables, decreasing requirements for specific uses, and adding new references to sustainability reserve account. And I believe we have our lovely planning director, Ms. Spear, here.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So the item request did come to us in October of last year as a request from the Downs to look at the EV charging ordinance, specifically as it relates to large scale retail. The ordinance was drafted in 2021 and hadn't been put to the test necessarily for large scale retail, and the requirement for level 3 was quite extensive for that. So that's what started the request. And then as we went through it with Sustainability Committee, there were a few other things that needed to be changed and addressed. I think when this was originally adopted, we always knew that we would come back to revisit it to see how it had been working. And so that is what's before you today. The bulleted items, let me share my screen. The packet, the red items are the new additions and deletions, and then the green are things that have just moved. The way the parking ordinance section was before, you had your standard parking requirements, 4 spaces per 1,000 for this, and then EV charging was separate, and it was a little bit cumbersome to administrate. So we combined it and made it as one table, and then just for ease. And so some of the uses before in the EV charging just were under the blanket other commercial uses and a certain percentage. Now they're specifically listed out, but the percentages have not changed for those. They just go in the same parking table. So that's a big one. We did address that single family and two family homes outside of subdivisions, that the EVCS spaces are not required. We had so what this means is we get a one-off building permit we give 5 of those per year. And if they're not in a subdivision, they don't have to do the requirement. We used to have, the zoning administrator could waive it, but you still had to pay the fee. So we just cleaned that up. That had been an item of some discussion amongst our code enforcement officers. That seemed reasonable to the sustainability committee. We also updated some definitions for the ready to differentiate between the residential and commercial. That had always been a little bit of a sticking point to what level of items did you need in the home or the business to actually quantify being ready. So we added that. And then we included the requirement that EV spaces have to be rounded up to an even number. So 1.5 is not 1, it's 2. And then the level 3 chargers, we removed that requirement for those level 3 chargers in the retail greater than 25,000 square feet. And then we reduced the amount of EV spaces for commercial and retail uses. And I gave you a summary table in your packet. Those are the uses that were really targeted. And some of those uses, and Jamie Fitch, the sustainability manager, is here as well, but maybe I can sum it up. When the sustainability committee looked at first targeting where we wanted to have EV chargers, they thought about the uses and are the employees going to be there for a long period of time, and can they charge while they're at work? Or is the user of that service going to be there for a long period of time and they can charge? So some of these have come down. The medical and dental offices, really the percentage, the 5 and 10%, they thought that's enough for employees. People are not staying there. You and I would only stay there for perhaps an hour, hour and a half. And the same with restaurants with drive-throughs, and then without drive-throughs. So we reduced those as well. But the primary change, the only level 3 chargers that were required prior to this amendment were for those big box retailers. And so that was removed altogether. So there is an option to replace level 2 chargers with a level 3 charger. If you so do it, you can do a trade-off, but that's included. But that is really the things that were changed. So I know it's a lot of red and green, but so I'm happy to go through anything you have a specific question about to provide a little bit more clarity.
Sure. No, I mean, I appreciate that. And I mean, I believe that the Sustainability Committee is the experts when it comes to these things, as well as Jamie. I mean, initially, I have a couple questions. I don't know if you
Go
guys,
ahead.
when I'm just kind of general questions. You're saying that you are limiting this, it applies to only the redeveloped parking lot area and not the whole parking lot. Is that a typical type of thing?
It is in this instance because of the nature of the EVCS, you would have to tear up your existing parking lot and install that conduit or the electrical underneath the pavement. So when they first drafted this, they decided that they wouldn't make people do that and retrofit. It would just be for new. So if I have if I have an existing office space with 12 parking spaces, but I want to expand and add some square footage, and I have to add 6 new spaces, those 6 new spaces would have to comply, but I would not have to retro those older 12. We didn't want to discourage redevelopment, and I think that's part of it.
Why couldn't they use the new spaces to be in conformance instead of, and so you're saying they don't like take the new spaces and use that to be in conformance and make those the EV spaces? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
It does make sense, but I don't know if it would work out. The numbers might work out
Okay.
well, but they would have to use the percentages. They would have to make some of those, perhaps the EV ready or EV capable spaces,
Right.
for sure.
whenever a request comes in individually from someone saying, I don't like this, I don't want to do it, I'm just kind of curious what's going on around us. So I mean, when it comes to the level 3 requirements, I'm curious, no concept of what other towns are doing in regards to EV requirements. And then, you know, when I think about the fact that we have the market basket coming in and they're looking for a waiver to not be able to provide, I think this level 3, I really want to understand if this is normal or not.
And I think Jamie may speak to this. I think we were the first town in the state of Maine to put an EV requirement in place.
Okay.
And I'm sure that a few have followed suit since, but
That's a perspective.
we're the first in line, right? So I think that's why we acknowledge that it was definitely a learning opportunity.
Right.
And my understanding is the level 3 chargers are more commercial in nature. Like you may have seen the Tesla chargers that went in at the Fairfield Inn. So in that instance, that was actually that company came to us, did a site plan, and they put those in and run them. And so the level 3 is oftentimes more of a commercial endeavor on its own, not necessarily an extra thing that maybe a Home Depot or a Lowe's or Market Basket would be in the business of doing.
Yeah, I agree. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I'll
Does
just,
Costco have level 3? Have they put their,
Costco does not have.
have they
any
put their
EV charging.
EVs in yet?
They were not required. They were required to plan for some in the future.
I thought there was something that they were supposed to do that they weren't doing.
I'm holding a very small amount of money for what their notice of decision required of them.
Yeah,
I'll hold it forever.
okay. I don't know if you guys have questions. I mean, I have more.
I guess if it's all right with you, I'll just take the opportunity to briefly say that in my experience, kind of on the development side, working places like Massachusetts and elsewhere, I can attest that this is a pretty robust, progressive policy that Scarborough has, even compared to some places that, you know, in the greater Boston area where you might assume they would have even more aggressive requirements. I'll also note that, you know, there is, not that we want cost to drive things necessarily, but these can be pretty expensive, and it's pretty common for owners and developers to seek incentive funding to help defray or support the cost. And we're obviously in an environment now where grant funding, particularly around so-called green measures, is jeopardized. So I wouldn't want us to be in a situation where we're kind of creating kind of a so-called unfunded mandate. But I guess my overall feeling on this is that these are pretty thoughtful changes, and it still results in a pretty good system. Thanks.
Bill, do you have a?
I was,
Put your mic
um,
on.
what's your sense of how well this is going to benefit the town of Scarborough as an ordinance on EV stations? You've been immersed in it, but I'd like to sort of drop down to the bottom line of whether you think this is a good start, or this is a well-developed, whether the committee work that led it to here was sufficient or insufficient. Those are the kind of questions I had.
I think this is a positive body of work. I was just doing a quick calculation just so you would, so for Market Basket, it's about an 80,000 square foot building, and their parking is 4 per 1,000. So you're looking at 320 spaces. And even with this reduction, we're going to end up with 32 EV charging spaces. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
And 5%, that's what really drove this conversation, actually doing the math. Oh, that is heavy.
Mhm.
So I think it's a much probably more realistic and attainable draft ordinance for us.
So you've been able to, I know it's had substantial committee work, but you've had a chance to have your own fingerprints on getting it to
Yes.
where it's,
Yes.
okay. Thank you.
I can't find my notes, but I thought I had read that you said the level 3 is typically installed by like Tesla or an outside.
Right.
Okay, and so it's not normal to be asking a developer per
It
se.
didn't feel that way to
Right.
me.
Yeah.
It felt like we were requiring, I think someone used the example of we're requiring a gas station with your supermarket, so it felt a little uncomfortable.
Okay.
It felt a reasonable request. to
Yeah,
me.
no, that makes sense when you
Um,
kind of put it that way, I guess, right? Well, I think it's great that we're gonna make changes to add the in lieu fees to the sustainability reserve account, which is great. And then we're gonna try to fund that during the budget season as
Yes.
well. I don't know if I really had any other questions. I mean, this is a very technical type of ordinance, and I trust that the technical experts have done their due diligence. I appreciate all the time and effort, because I know this has been a big push by the Sustainability Committee, and so I appreciate all the hard work they've put behind this, and I know it's been a lot. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, so with that, I will entertain a motion.
Move to approve as advised.
Second,
Any discussion? All in favor? All right, that is 3-0. Great. Thank you, Autumn and Jamie. Good work.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on to item 6, which is consider a recommendation from the Long Range Planning Committee for a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance to define a new use, landscape contractor, separate from the contractor offices, shops, and storage yard use, and to permit landscape contractors in the rural farm and Running Hill Gorham Road mixed-use district, zoning district with a special exception approval and performance guarantees, and to permit the landscape contractor use in the industrial use as they currently permitted under the contractor offices, shops, and storage yard uses. And we have Ms. Spear here again. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, this one came to us as a request from Mr. Beaver in 2023. And I will say I wasn't here when his original request came in for the Board of Appeals to look at. And my understanding is that he went through the Board of Appeals for a special exception to allow a different non-conforming use. So there was a non-conforming use on the site, and then he got a special exception to do a different non-conforming use because it wasn't any worse for the site. And then, yes, when he came in to talk to us about housing, there was an issue because his landscape contractor use is not a permitted, it's a non-conforming use. So, and I feel like I've gotten maybe confused and I don't, in some of the translations, I don't even really know if I fully understand. I thought we were talking about being a landscape contractor being a permitted use so you could reap the benefits of that. And so that was the employee housing conversation that we've been talking about. Setting the employee housing conversations aside, there was still a lot of conversation and discussion about is landscape contractor use valid in the rural farming district. And so I'll focus the rest of my input on that. And that's what the proposal is for you to contemplate today. The Long Range Planning Committee spent some time with it over a year. They heard about it at one point. They didn't want to discuss it. It came back again. They did talk about it. And we did end up drafting some language that would create this new use landscape contractor. Landscape contractor currently is jumbled in with our contractor yard definition. And so we created the landscape contractor definition and then permitting the use as a special exception in RF. So you would have to go to the planning board for an advisory opinion. They look at it from a use perspective, neighbor impacts, and then it goes to Board of Appeals and they look at it, those special exception requirements, and then yes or no. And then you would have to go to site plan back to planning board. So it's a pretty lengthy process. But that's what the Long Range Planning Committee was comfortable with. There was a lot of conversation. These meetings they got pretty interesting about this topic. There was some conversation. Yeah, if you're just a normal landscape contractor and you're bringing in materials, you're kind of like a farmer and you're doing sort of the same thing, you have some of the same equipment. Then there were some concerns about, well, if you're actually doing plowing, you're, up early morning hours, a lot of noise, a lot of trailers, a lot of things. So we went back and forth with that. And that's why I think the special exception came up, and then the performance standards were added as well. And you can see that's where those were really, some concern about, the trailers, number of vehicles was a big topic, what kind of impact are we gonna have? There was a concern about the size of the property so that everyone in RF didn't suddenly want to do a landscape contractor. So they put a specific number of acres, and that being 4 for this use. So that's where we got with that one. And then at the same, during this process, we had the same conversation come up about Running Hill zoning district. And Running Hill is another interesting zoning district where we have quite a few things that are already there, and they maybe aren't necessarily permitted under the newer zoning district. That one, we actually found out through a notice of violation for a burning issue that they had been running the landscape contractor use there for, I believe, 8 years. And so we brought that into the same conversation, similar use, similar situation. Running Hill is pretty prohibitive if you don't have public sewer. So there's not a whole lot you can do there. And so that's what's before you today to consider. Let me share.
I have a question.
Sure.
With the Running Hill, so right now in Running Hill, unlike with rural farm, you cannot do a special exception application for the landscaping
Can't do a special exception
Running
for
Hill.
landscape anywhere.
anywhere.
It's
Okay.
not allowed except in the industrial district. And
So
that's
the
why,
special exception that he got in rural farm,
that's a different one. So he had a non-conforming use there before, and he got a special exception for another non-conforming use. That makes,
yeah, I didn't think,
Yeah.
I thought you could only have one.
well, so this, if we approved this, if you all approved this, this would replace that. And then he would just be an allowed use with a special exception.
Right.
It's very strange situation. It really is. It's,
Right, and
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but what you're asking us to replace that with is not meeting his need, because it's agricultural seasonal housing is what we have before us right now. Is that correct?
well, that would be allowed, right? So that is contemplated in this too, so he could do seasonal housing. If he wants to do, homes, and I think that we have talked about that, he has to figure out a way to get access to them. And I'm not super prepared to have that conversation just off the cuff right now. He would have to figure, I believe the land in the back is where he would want it, and you would have to have, so it's a commercial business. And a single family home, and single family homes have to have frontage
Right.
and a particular lot size in the RF district. Each home would have to have 2 acres. You have to have 200 feet of frontage on a private way or a public road. So I don't know how we're back at this. I thought it was the employee housing. So
It is, and I think that's kind of how we left it.
and employee housing is different. You don't have to have all those other things. You can do it on the same lot. It's just restricted to the 8 months per year.
Right, and I think that's where I want to kind of not go down this road is, I
Right.
mean, first of all, I do not think landscaping fits the definition of commercial agriculture. And so I think I need a little guidance. If I feel that way, is this proposal for the rural farm is all contingent on that, correct? The acceptance of landscaping.
Right, it's basically, if you all believe this definition of landscape contractor in red should be permitted in rural farming district. There's a lot of similarities between the two definitions, except for snow removal services and things like that. So that's why I think when Mr. Beaver spot this, I think to his point, he thought that it would be allowed. It's there are a lot of similarities.
Right.
So
There, there are a lot of similarities.
yes, it's kind of a
between-
multifaceted, like.
Between
The first
landscaping
question
and,
is, do you believe that landscape contractor, this new definition is similar enough to the commercial agricultural definition to be permitted in RF as a use?
so no. I do not, I do not, I'm looking for guidance because I do not, and I don't want to, and if you
Well,
guys
did-
want to debate all of it.
Did this come to us with the point of view that it is similar enough?
I think that the long range planning committee, if I remember correctly, the vote was not unanimous. There was a lot of concern about the snow removal services and then storage of things. But ultimately, they did feel it was close enough to allow it with a special exception.
And the
so-
special exception with standards
Right,
is what allows you to
Right.
get to a good outcome when you're
Right.
trying to
you have option.
fit these things together.
Yeah, because when I look up, I mean, when I Google the definition of commercial agriculture, it's large scale production of crops and livestock for profit. And so I think when I look at rural farm, I'm thinking you're using the land and producing something off of it. And so I think that's where I'm just having a complete disconnect, take away everything between the definition. Could you do a contract zone? That was gonna be my question for the Running Hill.
Anyone can do a contract zone. The trick is in the contract zone is there has to be some public benefit shown.
Okay,
And that's always a little bit tricky. Typically that is,
housing.
you know, since I've been here, the contract zones have been for, conservation, funding for affordable housing.
Mhm.
What else have we seen? Roadway improvements, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I mean, counselors, generally, I feel uncomfortable sometimes making huge ordinance changes for individual properties. I think sometimes I get concerned about the repercussions of opening this door. And I've served on the zoning board for a really long time. It's really easy to get caught up in the yes, 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 and oh, like, well, that sounds great to me. And I think they sometimes operate in their own little world where I am concerned that we would, again, just be opening up the rural farm, Running Hill to a whole nother use of things where we have not really had that discussion of how we want to use those properties. And so, I mean, typically when you have a non-conforming property, you're allowed to have one kind of non-conforming use. You can't have all these different types of uses in a non-conforming use. That's why I was asking about a contract zone, because I just don't know if that would give them the availability to do something like that. So I'd really love your thoughts on moving this forward, if you think we need to. I think my suggestion at the last meeting was, I think town council wanted to talk about doing some sort of plan for the whole rural farm district or decide how we wanted to address that. Not sure.
Influenced by the fact that it has a lot of similarity, so that it's not asking to put square peg in a round hole. So given the long-range planning's efforts at coming up with something that's responsible, something that our planning director considers responsible, I guess I'm inclined to accept their much more studied analysis than we three. So that's kind of where I am.
I mean, should we be moving forward an ordinance for seasonal housing if this is not what the original request was? And I feel like what we've had before us today is not what the applicant was even looking for, and we're gonna move forward an ordinance that is not benefiting the applicant or anyone at this time, but opening a door. Sorry, Corey, go.
No, sorry. Well, I guess on that last question, I'm still relatively new to the ordinance and we need some guidance on sort of how this is supposed to work procedurally, whether this almost serves as like a pre-first reading that we're we're kind of baking things in, like actual language into an ordinance, then goes in front of the full council, or whether it's more, we're sort of forwarding our advisory opinion, for lack of a better way to put it. Maybe, I mean, I understand that there has to be, you have to start somewhere, there needs to be some language, but I wonder if we could forward an ordinance with some commentary or caveats about that particular circumstance, that particular item. And Chair, if it's all right with you, I'll take the opportunity to also just weigh in on, in general,
Yeah.
unless you wanted to say something else, but I guess I generally, first of all, this is very confusing, and to hear their experienced planning director express her own sort of uncertainty around certain details, I think really drives that home. And there are some different things that have got conflated here in terms of what was proposed when, and two different zones involved and different processes. So it's hard to kind of get your head around it. But at the end of the day, I sort of feel like I'm inclined to agree with Bill, in that I think based on and there's some subjectivity here in terms of how you interpret some of these definitions. And to me, I think it's similar enough to agriculture that I'm comfortable with it, given that there'd be a special exception process and performance standards. I know it's been discussed in the past that there's, we'll see, I guess if this goes forward, we'll see how other counselors feel about it. I know sometimes there are varying levels of comfort with the perception that we're sort of putting too much on the ZBA or the planning board in terms of proving things on a case-by-case basis. But to me, this feels within the realm of reasonable. And I also feel like given the parameters around it, it sort of limits, there's sort of a limited number of instances where this could realistically come up again. And then finally, I do appreciate the sentiment around wanting to do a broader step back and look at the zone overall. But I do feel that we owe the applicant a response. And it's been a long process already. And I personally wouldn't feel great about having to tell the applicant, oh, we're actually going to go back and we're going to step even further back and look at this, and sort of have to put things on hold. So I think whether we recommend approval or not, to me it feels like there should be some sort of more definitive recommendation at this stage.
I mean, what concerns me is we're gonna go to the council and say, we had an application and here's an ordinance that actually doesn't address the application that we received, but here's a new ordinance, is kind of what I'm feeling like. He's looking for housing and we're producing an ordinance that is seasonal housing. That's not what he's looking for. And I think that will be my comments is, we have this ordinance, but yet it's not addressing the issue that the resident came forward through, but yet we're moving forward with. I would prefer, and I don't know how Paul feels at this point, to really at least try to address this issue instead of moving forward something that doesn't solve the problem. Yeah, Paul, why don't you,
Yeah,
I would appreciate
I
at this
agree.
point, it's only 5:30, we got time.
So, yeah, so the issue came up because after I got the non-conforming use permit, started operating my landscaping business, that's been a non-issue. But then I wanted to bring the site plan for review to build a house or a duplex at the back end of the lot. And Brian told me that essentially because I have a non-conforming use on the property, that means my road frontage is allocated to the non-conforming use. So I have no access to put a conforming use at the back of the property. So that's how this all came about. So I kind of went back to just asking, my use is so similar to agriculture anyway. Can we just make it a conforming use? And then I will no longer have that problem. I can build a house or a duplex on the property, and I won't have that seemingly unreasonable roadblock in the way. I just want to build a house there.
So it would solve his problem.
No, because this ordinance is for seasonal employee housing. And he wants housing. Just, he wants to be able to have year-round, multi-unit.
But if it makes my use conforming, doesn't it now mean I can build a house there?
That was what I thought.
So, right, the first part of his request was to make his use conforming, which the landscape contractor with a special exception, that would give him a conforming use. But he wants to be able to have a single family home in much the same way that perhaps a farm might have a home.
Right.
And that, I mean, you could strike the, if you were, and that's why I think there's like three questions. First, is landscape contractor, the use itself appropriate in the RF district? And if you're okay with that, that's the first question. And then I had written in, because in our conversations, you had talked about it wanting to be for employees. So I wrote in the employee housing to be able to do that.
When I initially was looking to build a duplex or two, before I realized that I was limited by the acreage. I was originally, my first plan was to build two duplexes, potentially to rent to employees so that they could have a place to live in Scarborough.
And so the real issue is even in commercial agriculture, I do not believe that you would be able to come in and build a house on the same lot as a commercial agricultural endeavor. So you would still have to subdivide it and have to have frontage and the area for that space. But I don't feel super confident in my answer for that. I'd like to think about that because commercial agriculture is its own use. And our ordinance is very nuanced in the way you can do homes and single family and the frontage requirements. Now, if Brian, our zoning administrator, said that you could use, it sounds like he talked to you about you would have to have frontage for both lots and you only have enough frontage for the one lot. It doesn't matter even if it's conforming or not, you have to have the frontage for both. So I'm struggling a bit with if there even is a way for me to fix what he wants.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think,
I'm getting to.
no, and I'm now on the same page. I got it. Thank you. I think I circle back around to my question is, if we adopt this landscape contractor use, does that mean anyone in the RF zone can then open a contracting business next door to me?
It means that if they had the 4 acres and they went through the special exception process, they could request that. The advisory opinion comes to planning board first, and that's a public hearing. It's a notification of your neighbors. And I think that is where you would really find out, is this a yay or a nay? Is that first advisory opinion from planning board and the land use appropriate?
Right.
So and then typically what would happen is the planning board said, no, every neighbor is against this. This is a bad site. You don't have enough room for this. That would go to the Board of Appeals and hopefully they would see that as the land use.
And you're only notifying abutters though, right? And
the
that's what,
500.
now, I don't
feet,
like that though, because there could be someone a door down that is actually gonna have like, I don't know,
Over.
their kids at a bus stop. I don't know. I just, that part of it doesn't,
Yes.
so I mean, we hear Autumn saying I don't know how you guys are feeling about this. I'm inclined to, I don't know if we should table it and give us more time to try to all get on the same page about what the applicants are actually requesting, but then I understand that the Running Hill guy he's on a deadline.
Yes, that particular one is a deadline.
And I mean, his emergency is not my emergency, unfortunately. And I'm not sure what will happen with that situation.
In that instance, if we were continuing to discuss it, we could give them an extension.
Okay, yeah,
So
and that's
a reason.
That's great, knowing that we could
knew
do
it was
that.
not
I think that's great.
completely-
I don't want to be like, oh, let's take some time to figure this out, and this guy's just gonna have to be in violation and be out. No, I don't want that. I'm concerned moving this forward with all of the issues that we're having right now. I have a very hard time. I feel like articulating to the council I mean, we would have Mr. Beaver coming up and being like, I asked for this. And we're kind of there. So I don't know if there's any motions. I mean,
I share some of your concerns and zoning for a single applicant owner. I don't favor that. So,
Can I mention that there is a house 3 driveways down that has a house and a landscaping company.
right.
And then all surrounding me is residential units, and I just want to add one.
And under the current ordinances, that does not help him. I'm more inclined to table this. I think it would be to, when would we want to table this to? Like I said, we're not meeting in April. I'm sorry, I apologize. We could table it to May, or we could table it to a time uncertain to give Autumn time. I don't know what your life and schedule is like.
May would be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more of just a conversation with Brian and I, and probably our attorney, to
Yeah.
figure out if there's any, what other things would have to be. But it sounds like you all are comfortable with the use as a special exception?
The majority is.
yeah, I think the use as a special exception and rereading those conditions that can be imposed. Because you're always saying, are we gonna all of a sudden approve it? And it's going to find that the neighborhood is going to suffer the consequence of it. And that this would provide the ability in the planning board to set those, zoning board, to set those conditions, so as to be responsive to the neighborhood. So in that respect, I'm okay.
Okay, so it's really about. And I guess I'm framing that up, there may not be a fix for Mr. Beaver's issue if it is truly a lot size, lot frontage. That's a much greater
Yes.
ordinance.
Well, and I think that's
Yeah.
That's a townwide
correct.
conversation.
Right. And I think that's where I know I don't want it to come back if we're not able to solve that problem for him.
I agree.
And so I guess stay tuned. So I will motion to table this item to the May 2025 ordinance committee meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, thank you. Future meetings and agenda items. So as I mentioned, we'll not be meeting in April, so our next meeting will be in May. I think Autumn, you said what's coming up? I thought Angela had something coming up too, right? Yeah.
Do not have anything, no, we talked about something that's gonna go to conservation.
Oh,
instead
okay.
of here, since we won't have the April. In May, I'm sure there's something, but I can't
All right.
remember. it.
We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay. With that being said, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Great.
Thank you. Well done.